In Activity 9, What is a Stem For?, students learn about the structure and function of a vital part of the plant, the stem. Students set up an experiment to show that a stem transports water up into the leaves of a plant. From the kit, you will need Activity Sheet 9, magnifiers, plant parts chart from Activity 7, bottle of food coloring, clear glass jars, and stems of plants from the class garden. You will also need to provide red crayons, head of celery with leaves, sharp knife, and tap water. To prepare for Session 1, make a copy of Activity Sheet 9 for each student. Obtain a bunch of celery, preferably one with a full set of leaves, and use a sharp knife to cut one stalk of celery for each team of 4. Stand each stalk in a jar of water until time for the activity. It is important that the celery does not dry out. If it does, the experiment will not work. Cut 8 plants from the class garden and place each one immediately in a jar of water with a celery stalk. Make sure to choose plants tall enough to extend above the jar of water. Fill each of the 8 jars 3/4 full of tap water. Each student will need a red crayon, and each team will need a jar of water with a celery stalk and a plant. To begin Session 1, refer students to the plant parts chart and point out the stems. Have students help you make a list on the board of the possible jobs of a stem. Students will probably notice that wilted plant leaves recover and are no longer wilted, and the stem is no longer bent over after the plant receives water. Ask students, how do you think water gets to the leaves of the plant? Students may guess that water moves up the stem to the leaves. Show students one of the jars of water with a celery stalk and a plant in it, and point out that both the celery and the plant have stems and leaves. Next, add 10 to 15 drops of red food coloring to the water in the jar and stir it gently. The water should be deep red. If it has been more than 4 hours since you first cut the celery and plant stems, it's a good idea to make a fresh, clean cut. Begin a class discussion by asking, what do you think will happen to these stems if we leave them in the colored water overnight? If some students predict that the stems will absorb the color, ask, how far up the stems do you think the color will go? Students are likely to say that only parts of the stems that are underwater will turn color. Next, give each student a copy of Activity Sheet 9 and a red crayon. Distribute a jar of water with a stalk of celery and a plant to each team of 4. Take the bottle of red food coloring from team to team, adding 10 to 15 drops to each jar. Tell students to use their red crayons to color the water in the jar on the activity sheet, and also to color the pictures of the celery and the plant up as far as they think the red will go. Place the jars in the classroom where they will not be disturbed overnight. At the end of Session 1, make sure to collect the activity sheets for use in Session 2 and return the food coloring to the kit. To prepare for Session 2, each student will need a red crayon. Each team will need 2 magnifiers and a jar of colored water with a celery stalk and a plant. Return students' copies of Activity Sheet 9 and give each student a red crayon. Distribute 2 magnifiers and a jar with stems in colored water to each team of 4. Allow students time to examine the celery and plant stems in their jars. Instruct students to use their red crayons to add color, if necessary, to the picture on the activity sheet to show how much the red color has been absorbed by the veins of the celery stalk. It is likely that the red has traveled all the way to the tips of the leaves. The coloring will be more obvious in the celery than in the darker green plants. When all students have examined the stems and colored the picture, ask, what happened in your experiment? Students will have observed that the red coloring traveled up the veins of the celery stalk far higher than the water level. Then ask, what job does a stem perform for a plant? How can you tell? Students should realize that the stem carries water up the plant. Since the red coloring moved up into the leaves of both plants, it shows that a stem carries water up into a plant. Explain that the main jobs of the stem are to carry water to the leaves and to hold the leaves up and out into the light. To conclude the activity, empty, rinse, and air dry the glass jars and return them to the kit along with the magnifiers. Make sure to leave the plant parts chart posted and to discard or compost the celery and stems. For science background, reinforcement activities, curriculum connections, and information about the Delta Science readers, please consult your DSM Teacher's Guide.